Hi everyone, T.G. Brown returns to Inside Scoop Live today to talk about his new book, Jericho Burning. The second book in his Warren Lawson series takes place on a Native American reservation threatened by wildfires. Warren must race against time to catch a neighbor who has become a killer before his deadly rampage destroys the whole community. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on the author. When T.G. Brown is not writing books, he is a martial arts practitioner and a competitive CrossFit athlete. He practices Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga, boxing, and Muay Thai. He competed in the sport of CrossFit in 2019 and placed in the top 1% of the world. Prior to injuring his knee in 2021, he competed in the occupational games and placed as the 29th fittest cop in the world. T.G. Brown is also a certified defensive tactics instructor for police officers in the state of Oregon. When he is not doing his own training, he works with police officers or civilians who want to learn how to stay alive in verbal, physical, or deadly use of force conflicts. You can learn more about T.G. Brown and his work at tgbrownbooks.com. Well, hi, T.G. Welcome back to Inside Scoop Live.
Hey, how are you?
Great. I'm excited to talk with you about your new book. Before we get into that, can you briefly introduce the Warren Lawson series for our new readers and listeners?
Yeah, so the Warren Lawson series is about Warren Lawson. He's an elite tribal cop on the Jericho Nation Reservation in Oregon. He's a police officer that will stop at nothing to protect people of his community. He struggles with the darkness that the job brings and kind of the things that he has within him as well, his own emotions that he's got to deal with. So he's kind of constantly at odds with himself.
Your new book, Jericho Burning, has just been out for a couple of days now, right?
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about the story and how it fits into the larger narrative of your series.
So Jericho Burning is the second of the Warren Lawson series. There's only two of them. So, it's a fast-paced manhunt type of story that's set during the 2020 wildfires on 4th of July weekend. It's kind of like a natural disaster type of story that meets a manhunt story in the vein of the movies like The Fugitive, kind of like that. So it's a sequel to the first book, and it takes place about 7 months after Tribal Honor.
Now, you wrote the second one pretty fast. Were you writing it as you were getting the first one ready to go out? How did that fall into place?
Yeah, no, I had these books written out a few years ago, actually. It was just took me some time to get it published. I was kind of saving money because a lot of it's independently funded by me. I'm an independent author. So I was kind of saving money and also a little bit of trepidation. I was a little scared to come out with it. You never know how people are going to receive your work. So yeah, I had a couple books already written out, edited, and gone through. It was just a matter of getting them professionally edited and published. So yes, I had this one pretty much done by the time the Tribal Honor came out. So the goal was if Tribal Honor did well enough, I could get the second one out quicker. That way my readers weren't waiting too long.
Yeah. As a reader, I'm almost afraid to start a series unless, there's at least a few to read. So I don't have to wait a year to read the next book.
Definitely. I'm the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm completely the same way. If I see that there's a couple of them, I'm like, okay, I can put my time into this, But it's not like an investment in just one book, that can be all right. But if you're looking for more of a series, it's always good to see that there's a couple. And so I was happy to get the second one out. I was blessed to get a lot of support on the first book. That kind of justified me doing the second one so quickly.
Well, perfect. Yeah. The Jericho Nation Reservation is a fictional setting. Why did you choose a fictional setting, and how did you approach developing this fictional world?
Jericho Nation's actually based on the real-life town of Grand Ronde. I decided to create a fictional tribal reservation because my stories are so realistic. I didn't want people to actually think that some of these things did happen in the real town of Grand Ronde because it's such a fantastic place and my stories have some traumatic events that happen. So I didn't want people to be confused that these things really happened. As far as researching the area, it was pretty easy because I grew up in that area.
Yeah, that's a good point you make about distinguishing fiction from reality, especially for the people living in that area.
Yeah.
People will...
You wake up and you're in the world that you're writing in. So it's pretty, you grow up, I've been out there my whole life. So, I know all the nice spots and all the, things like that. I've become one with the area, I guess you could say. And that definitely bleeds through in my writing.
Right. Now, the book is set, you mentioned, during the July 4th weekend, Wildfires, true event. Why did you choose this particular real world event as a backdrop, and how does this environmental crisis drive your story?
Yeah, I chose the backdrop because it added another layer of intensity to the story. I love the kind of manhunt, cat and mouse type of story, where one's avoiding the other. And then natural disaster stories have always fascinated me. So I felt that the combination of the two were unique, and I wanted to bring that idea to life. I think the wildfires definitely drive the crisis of the story in a number of ways. You have first responders that are spread thin because of the wildfires, because they're trying to get people to safety. And then amidst all that, you have a man that's completely lost his mind, and now he's on a killing spree. So you have another level of anxiety, fear, and suspense as the story goes along. So like I said, I felt like it was something that I have never seen or read before. And I like my stories to have a unique feel. And so I combined the two, and it worked out really well. So I think the more complexities for the characters to navigate, the better the story becomes.
Yeah. For me, it adds that extra layer of authenticity since it is based on a real world event.
Right, right. Yeah, just like I said, added that whole nother layer. And I think it brings people in to the story a little more just because they can remember where they were during that event too. I think that just was something I wanted to highlight. I haven't seen any stories about the wildfires that happened then. It was such a crazy time. I remember the sky being red when I woke up one day and I
Oh
was
my.
like, what is happening? So yeah, it definitely stuck with me, and that's why it made its way into the story.
Yeah. Now, Jericho Burning starts 7 months after Tribal Honor, after a deadly shootout. How does this event shape the current story?
I think it shapes the current narrative in the sense that Warren is continuing to grow as a person as well as a police officer. The first book really showed you why some of the characters in the series have so much trauma. I think the second book expands upon that and also shows the growth in some of those characters. By the end of Jericho Burning, you'll find that some of the characters are in a better place and others not so much. So it's not only is it a different case that they have to investigate, it's also different challenges, personal and professional.
Okay. Are a lot of the characters in the second book in your first book, they carry over?
Yes, yes. So there's some that carry over, and then there's a couple new ones I added to this one.
Okay. Can you tell us about Carl Jamison's character and what inspired his transformation?
Yeah, so Carl Jameson's kind of your everyday man. When you meet him, he just seems like every other person, in the world, is totally normal. And, I think with his character, it kind of resembles how chaotic 2020 was for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people felt that, I mean, it was insanity, right? There's so many changes that we're all going through because of what things that happened that year. And with Carl's character specifically, his life is full of people that kind of belittle him and make him feel small. And the question I kind of posed with him was, how much can someone take before they eventually snap? And before they said they've had enough and they don't want to feel small and worthless anymore. And they decided to change the narrative in a violent manner. And that's kind of what Carl does. He goes on a revenge quest, and he's had enough. And he, kind of becomes a force to be reckoned with because he's had so much anger just boiling within him for years and years and years that it just all comes out in one night. Yeah, and it definitely leaves the characters in a lot of peril.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta feel for people that have been belittled and bullied all their lives. I mean, yeah, how much can one person take before they go off the edge? Yeah.
Yeah, I think strangely enough, I think even though he does some pretty heinous things in the book, he is this kind of a sympathetic character in the end. My first villain wasn't as sympathetic. I think people just genuinely hated my first villain, which is what I wanted. But this one, I think, you definitely hate him because of how he's introduced in the novel. But as the story goes on, you understand where Carl Jameson's coming from. You definitely can feel sympathy for him, but then you remember what he's done and you're like, no, he's got to be stopped. And that was by design.
I like to connect with a character, whether he's bad or good, as long as I can connect with him and feel something for him. That makes a great character in my book.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Me too.
So tell us about Warren's battles against the wildfires and Carl Jamison's vendetta. How does that all weave together?
Yeah. So I think, they weave in and out of the story in multiple ways. there's scenes where Warren's forced to save someone due to the fires. There's other times where he's chasing Carl down. It depends on the scene. It changes pretty rapidly depending on what's going on. And, it's kind of like the wildfires are a reflection of what's going on internally between the two characters as well. Like you have this raging inferno going on. And then when you get to know Carl and you know what's going on inside of Warren's head, you can kind of see how it's that the fire within them as well as what's going on outside of them, if that makes sense. So, you have Carl's vendetta going on where he's on a revenge path to get those who wronged him. And then those are people that Warren is sworn to protect. So it leads them on this collision path. It's kind of one of those things where they're going to collide no matter what. And it's just, there's going to be fireworks when they do.
Makes for good reading, right?
That's the hope.
As your series progresses, how do you envision Warren Lawson's character evolving?
Yeah, I envision Warren growing more and more with each story. There'll be setbacks just like there are in real life, but as a whole, I see him progressing as a human being, becoming a better partner to Ashley, becoming a better family member to his father, mother, brother, or sister, all those things that he wasn't doing when we first meet him. I want to show that progression throughout his life because I find that very interesting. He kind of starts off a little bit like a machine. He's focused on the mission. He works out all the time. And then he meets Ashley and she kind of starts showing him maybe, the human sides are what make you strong, him learning that I think is, I really want to show. And then, I also kind of want to put him in a position where he becomes a mentor to other characters. I think that would be interesting given his backstory and the stories leading up to that. I think one day I'd like to have him in a role where he is mentoring young officers, because he's going to obviously have to teach them a different way of doing things that he did. And how does he deal with that? Because he can't teach other officers to go off the book because that could go very wrong. So, and Warren tends to color outside the lines. So I think him being a mentor one day definitely intrigues me. I'd like to do that because I think that would just bring a whole nother dynamic to his character and his internal struggle and all the more relatable to, everybody that's reading, hopefully.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had a quick flash of Tom Cruise being this, renegade pilot and then becoming the instructor for Top Gun. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. I guess, I never thought of that, but yeah, it's definitely pretty similar. Yeah, it definitely could be a similar plot line and, the police version of it.
Right.
In my series stuff.
You've got a lot going on in this story. We're going to add some more layers here. Jericho Burning explores themes of vengeance and personal breaking points. Can you elaborate on these central themes and how they play out in the story?
Yeah. The central theme, as you mentioned, all those things, vengeance and whatnot. But I would also say that one of the themes that's not touched on as much is that's kind of a fall from grace story for both Warren and Carl. I think that they are on this path that they think is the right thing to do. And by the end, it kind of becomes a path of destruction for both of them. And they're a shell of who they once were, both of them. And I think there's no going back from that. And I think that's an interesting dynamic to explore in future novels because of this novel. What happens in this novel? How does that shape them in the end? Because, when we first meet Warren, he is this strong protector of people and he's still that guy, but he definitely steps over a line in this one and there's no coming back from it. And how does he navigate that is the question.
Oh, I love that. Fall from grace. That's perfect. The bigger they are, the harder they fall.
Yeah.
Now, Warren's quest to understand Carl is a key element of the book. How did you approach developing the psychological aspects of their character dynamic?
Yeah. Funny enough, my wife, who's a mental health clinician, she helped me a ton with that, actually, exploring the psyche of, for lack of a better term, someone that's a maniac, right? I enjoy stories where officers investigate the mind of the suspect. It's not uncommon for us to use that logic in real investigations, especially when the people involved are suspects that have little to none criminal history, right? Because when they have no criminal history, we have nothing to go on, essentially, right? We never met this person,
right,
and we're trying to figure out why they're doing what they're doing so we can stop it from happening again. Because usually if you can find out the why, you can prevent something terrible happening in the future. When I was writing out this character, I was like, he's a complete unknown to my main characters. How would they catch him? How would they get ahead of this, right? And so they would have to get into his mind a little bit. And with my wife being a mental health clinician, I'd ask her questions like, what would they be thinking? What would cause a man to break like this, and things like that to make it as realistic as possible. And yeah, so I think understanding the psychological aspect of it was the best way to keep this plot moving forward and share that interesting bit of information with the readers as well.
Oh, that's wonderful that you have a research expert right at home with you. So,
oh, yeah, she is definitely the expert. I mean, funny story, when I was writing this book, we'd be like out for dinner and I'd be like asking her these crazy questions like, well, what would he do after this? What would he do if this person of his family survived, And I'm like asking terrible questions. And there's like people next to us are sitting there going like, what are these people talking about? He's talking about murder and fire and all this stuff. And I'm like, I had to explain like, no, it's make believe. It's not a real thing that we're talking about. But yeah, it was quite funny seeing the reactions on people's faces when we would talk about it in public. And they're like, oh yeah, we should probably be a little bit quieter when we're talking about a murderous psychopath and the psyche of that type of person. So
that's hilarious. Yeah, if you notice people moving away from you, backing away slowly, you're in trouble.
Yeah, that was kind of how we figured it out. We looked over and we saw people asking to move. We're like, oh no, sorry.
That's hilarious. So I mentioned earlier, you have several layers to this book, and also you talk about several sensitive issues in the story, like police brutality and the Black Lives Matter protests. How do you approach these topics in your writing, and how do they tie into the broader themes of the story?
Yeah, I don't really think too far into that. My main priority when I write a story is to entertain people. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of writers can get lost in the message, right? They want to, put this message out there and they want to get their opinion out about it. And nothing against that. I understand why some writers do that. It's just not my thing. So what I do is that when a social issue comes up in my story, I let it come naturally. I don't want my opinion shoved in someone's face. It's brought up more like a fact of life, that this is a situation that's happening. How do these characters fix it in their current situation? And I also think that bringing it up naturally like that, it connects with more people. And, I think that if we focus too much on the social issue, that the point of the story gets lost in translation and those social issues kind of become meaningless, and those issues do carry weight. So you don't want that to happen by pushing your own agendas into the story, right? So I just let it come naturally. And I think it makes the world feel lived in when those issues come up, and when people read my story, I want them to ride along with these characters and essentially vicariously live through these characters. And so we all live through those social issues every day. And so not bringing those up, I wouldn't be doing justice to the world and the story as well. The priority is always the story. The other stuff kind of just comes with it naturally.
I do like that approach. You have to mention them for authenticity because that's what happened during that time period. But to not focus on it, that's probably smart because you never know with the polarization today, it's like what kind of comment is going to set off someone if you insert your opinions into the story.
Yeah, exactly. And, I guess I like to think I'm humble enough to know that my opinion might not always be right. So I don't want my opinion to be forced into my stories either. I just think that you don't want to alienate people either by talking about these sensitive topics, right? So I think that's just the best way. And it's the most realistic way. I think a lot of my conversations with other officers or people while working as a police officer are a lot like my books. It's not like people shoving their opinion in my face and saying, this is what's right, you suck, or I'm saying that on my, or vice versa,
Yeah.
I think it just comes up naturally. And it's like, how does it affect us in our current predicament, right? And in our location, right?
Yeah.
So, which is different for everybody. It's completely different depending on where you're at. If you're in a big city or a county or, working state police, all those issues are different situations for everyone.
Right. Well, I like that approach. It's very smart.
Well, thank you.
I'm curious about your fellow officers, how they have responded to your books in general, and particularly your handling of the social issues that you just talked about.
Yeah. The officers I know that read my book seem to like it a lot. The social issues, as I said, they're not a huge focus. They're not really the main focus of the story, so it doesn't get brought up a whole lot. Mm-hmm. But when it does, I think they say I handle it with respect, which is what I set out to do. And, don't make it political, just respect the issues and tell a good story.
Right. How do you think Warren Lawson's vulnerability affects your readers, especially those in law enforcement?
Yeah, I think Warren's vulnerabilities make him a character that people can identify with, right? I really want to create a character that law enforcement officers could relate to. The hope is that with Warren's struggles, internal feelings, it makes it so that other officers that have gone through those traumas can feel normal, right? It's hard going through life believing you're different or strange because of the things you've gone through.
Hmm.
I also think that it goes for anyone that's experienced a trauma, right? If you experience a trauma, whether you're in law enforcement or not, I think that it makes you feel different or alienated from a group that possibly hasn't gone through that kind of thing, right? And so I think with Warren being open and vulnerable, like in Jericho Burning specifically, he's seeking counseling for what he's gone through. And I think that's a brave thing to do, right? I think that in law enforcement going through counseling for a lot of years, that's not been the normal, right? That's,
Mm.
we have to be macho tough, right? And I think that showing a character that is macho and tough, and actually he's tough because he's not fearless. It's because he faces the fears that he is deathly scared of. He is trying to face them, whether it's fighting an evil person or it's his internal issues, right? If he's feeling a certain way, he's got to try to understand these emotions if he wants to be the best officer he can be.
Yeah. It's not a weakness, it's a strength to go for help when you need it, or even if you don't know you need it.
Right. I think that a lot of officers don't realize that they need it either. I got to say that when I started writing, the books are fictional, but for me personally as an officer, it is a way of getting my emotion out. And it definitely, I didn't realize how many things I've experienced as a whole. Being a police officer, you experience so many things on a daily basis that it's like you've lived 5 lives, right? Because you
Right.
just have so many different experiences. And I didn't really realize that until I started writing a lot. When I started writing a lot, I was like, wow, I just have so much up here. And I'm just, small town cop. I'm not like a New York City cop or anything like that. So I couldn't even imagine what it's like for someone that works in a Los Angeles or a New York or Dallas, Texas. Those big cities, they got to experience so much trauma that it's unbelievable. So if my stories can connect with them, and they can look at that and say, okay, I'm not weak for being vulnerable. I think that would really sustain a long career, and not only that, sustain a life after police work, right? I think that's been a constant problem with law enforcement, is that we don't really move on from the job, right? And so
Mm.
I think it all starts with facing your vulnerabilities.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Is there a lot of burnout in the profession?
Yeah, there definitely is. Like I mentioned, police officers can't really, they don't move on well from the job because there's
Mm.
a psychological burnout, and suicide rate is high with law
Mm.
enforcement, military, firefighters. And I think that, it is that psychological burnout that you're just talking about. And it's truly sad. It's terrible. And like I said, the hope one day, the grander hope is that these stories an officer can pick up and read and feel like they're okay. Feel like that's okay to feel this way. And
Right.
because it's not necessarily the culture in every police department in the United States. So if that's something that these stories do, then I think that's mission accomplished.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how do you balance writing about authentic law enforcement procedures with accessibility of the language for general readers?
So I try to create the most authentic experience possible when writing these stories, but not all police work is exciting, right? So people don't want to read about every single detail about what police do. So I try to implement the more exciting or interesting parts, right? And bring them in a realistic, authentic way. So readers feel like, they're a police officer as they read it, right? I want them to essentially, like I said, vicariously live through my characters. So
Hmm.
I stay away from typical cop jargon, because I think, obviously that can be confusing for someone that's not a police officer. So I try to stay away from that and just, use the most common terminology to make it easy to understand. And, even if there are some parts of the story that are less exciting parts of police work, but it's still realistic, I try to add humor to those scenes just to keep the plot moving and keep it interesting, and show that side of police work in a fascinating way.
Yeah, that's great. Rather than just, kind of dictating, here's what happens in the police force.
Right, right. I just try to find like when I'm trying to show a scene or I have something like that, like for example, paperwork is something that we do a lot of, right? So just like adding humor while a character is doing paperwork or something like that, I think that will makes it a little more interesting than just, oh, we're doing paperwork all the time. It sucks. So, something like that, just to show that side of the job in an interesting way.
What techniques do you use to create tension and pacing?
I outlined this book from start to finish. I had it all mapped out, the action, the pacing, the character development, all that character arcs. The whole thing was ready to go. I knew that it was going to happen in a 24-hour period. I stuck to that thought because I thought it pushed the plot forward and really put the characters in a lot of unknown situations because of that. And so I think that made the reading experience more exciting. So that was definitely what I used for this book. And I plan to use it for future books because it just came along so much nicer. In my opinion, my experience, the first book, Tribal Honor, was definitely, I didn't outline at all. I just went into it, my heart, into everything. I write everything with my heart. But this one was my heart, and I had, battle plans for, I had a map of where I was going versus just, writing from the heart. And I think that definitely helped, and I'm going to continue to do that.
Yeah, yeah. I think I'd have to outline as well just to keep myself on track. How does your background in martial arts and physical fitness influence your action scenes?
Yeah. So again, I think that it makes it feel authentic. I think that you can research a topic all you want, but it's a different ballgame when you've actually lived it. I've been in uses of forces. I've, done sparring sessions, so when I draw from my experience, I think it adds a different dynamic. Fight scenes and stories are nothing new, but when you add real life experience, it adds a level of brutality that makes you feel each punch, kick, elbow, knee, wrestling maneuver, all that stuff. And that's what I set out to do. I wanted my readers to not only read the fight scenes, but to experience them, and I think when you're experiencing them, it makes it that much more exciting. And so, yeah, that was the goal of that. And so I think really drawing on my own experiences and feeling the chaos that those situations bring, and then putting that down on paper and going through it over and over again to make sure that it's tidied up as perfect as possible. That was definitely something I wanted to be known for as a writer, because I've seen a lot of fight scenes and read a lot of fight scenes as well in other books, and I'm like sitting there thinking, I don't think it would work out that way. So I didn't want my books to do that. So I wanted someone who was experienced in martial arts or fighting that they could read that and go, yeah, this guy did his homework. He knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, authenticity is the key. So as authentic as you can make it. I mean, we know it's fiction, but you've got to make it believable still. So
yeah, I think it definitely impacts people more when it feels like it really happened.
Right. You talked a little bit about this, but as the second book in your series, what new insights or skills did you bring to writing Jericho Burning?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess similar answer as before. Definitely the outlining. The outlining is the new thing that I did in this one versus book one. And so I think that's part of the reason why this one got out quicker as well, because it was far more organized as well. Like my thoughts were more organized in this one. I think like Jericho Burning was more of what's in my head versus real life experience. And I think Tribal Honor is a majority in my head, but I definitely implemented real things that I went through in the first book to add that emotional depth to the characters.
How do you choose the conflicts in your books? Like with Jericho Burning, it was the fires, the wildfires, based on real events, as you discussed. Is that something that you plan to do going forward in the series?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think that if it just feels right, I do it. I know that's kind of a lame answer, but that's just what I do. I think whatever feels right for where the story goes and where I want my characters to go. And that's kind of where I always think about the characters, first and foremost, they're usually the characters and what makes sense for them and where I want them to go as the series progresses. So that's kind of where I'm at. Hopefully, my plan is to do another Warren Lawson book. And in the future, I plan to explore more issues of Native American culture, such as, Native American women that are becoming victims to violent crimes. I think, unfortunately, it's a very high statistic. And kind of have a need to have a story that revolves around that, and not only that, but showcase the strong Native American women that survived such traumas. I think that's something that I could definitely talk about and implement into my next story. Again, it's a heavy topic and it's hard to do, but like I said, there's a gravitational pull, I guess, to those stories for me. And so that's what I want to do for my next one.
Okay, that sounds great. So now this one, has it been outlined?
My third one, yeah, it's been typed. A rough draft's been typed, but I still got to go through the editing process and whatnot on that. So still got to do some work on that one. But I have a copy, a map, I guess. All that's all ready to go. I just got to get with my editors and see what we need to fix and hash out before we release it.
Okay. Now, you mentioned adding a couple of strong female characters or additional female characters. What does that look like? How do you go about creating your female characters?
Yeah, I'm very proud of the main female character I have, Ashley. Her character is definitely very strong-willed, and I've always been proud of having her in my stories, and I plan to add a couple more. Yeah, I'm excited to do it. I think that there's a lot of strong women I've met throughout my time in law enforcement and outside of law enforcement. My whole life I've known tons of strong women. My family is full of strong women that affected me deeply. So I'm excited to write those characters, because they deserve to be in the story. I wanted to do it right off the bat, but I had so many characters that I was juggling that I didn't want to force it either. I had to be patient with this and trust my plan that these books would be successful enough for me to get to these characters, and when I do, I'm, like I said, I'm very excited to share it because it'll add another dynamic to the story that wasn't there before, and it'll continue to evolve.
Absolutely. And definitely something to look forward to. So what do you hope readers will take away from Jericho Burning and your Warren Lawson series?
Yeah. So as far as what I want them to take away from Jericho Burning is, every time I write a story, I hope that I provoke some deep thought and entertain them at the same time. I think that's usually the goal of every story that I write. I always want people to read the story, and after they put it down, they think, wow, that was a great story. And they think about a scene that affected them in a good way or bad way, whatever it might be. I like to incite emotions in people because the best stories I can remember incited emotions out of me. And I love that feeling, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what I hope. I hope that when people read these stories, that's what they feel. I think they have both a sense of entertainment but there's a part of them that's thinking about the deeper themes of the story, right? And I didn't want it just to be an action-packed, shoot 'em up type story, whatever. I wanted to have that kind of excitement as far as action, but I wanted people to have something to chew on, something to think about after.
Right. So what's next for you? Are you working on another book in the series, or do you have another project you're working on?
Yeah. So, like I said, I do got the third Warren Lawson book, planned out and ready to go. But my plan is for my next book to come out. It's going to be an all new book project. I haven't announced it yet, but I plan to very shortly. Right now, I'm very focused on Jericho Burning and its success. But like I said before, I'm an independent author, so this is all really a passion project for me. My wife and I would put our own money into this, and because we love it, and I hope I can continue to do it till I'm 90. That's the goal. I love this stuff, and I can't wait to share the next project. It's going to be a lot newer than what I've done before. But again, I had a gravitational pull to this story, and I can't wait to share it.
Oh, nice. So tell people how to connect with you, your website, and where they can find your books.
Yeah, so my website is www.tgbrownbooks.com. My books can be found on Amazon. The Warren Lawson series, you could Google search T.G. Brown, Jericho Burning, or T.G. Brown Tribal Honor. You should be able to find it there. My Instagram's T.G. Brown Books, and then my Facebook is just regular T.G. Brown. Feel free to contact me on any of those. My email's on my website. You can contact me there as well. And look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Well, thank you, TG, for joining me again. It's been a delight to catch up, and I love your enthusiasm, and it's always such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me today for my interview with T.G. Brown, author of Jericho Burning. You can learn more about T.G. Brown and his work at tgbrownbooks.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.